Did we decide on a host, or are we just
Nope.
winging it?
No, I think we played
okay.
I just clicked the button.
Excellent. Okay, I'll go. We're back. We're live. Hello. We're doing our chat on writing advice, but this time we're doing a little bit of a different spin on it. We're doing writing advice that we have both given and received. I figured we would start with something like the 2 pieces of writing advice that one that we've received that worked really well for us, and one we've received that really didn't work for us, because I think that it's important to note how objective writing advice is. Depends on everybody. Everyone has their own situation, and everyone has their own things that work for them and doesn't work. I know, Kelly, you said that you looked up a bunch of different tidbits of writing advice that are common. So let's start with you. Did you see anything on the list that you thought, oh, I tried that and that just didn't work for me?
One that I'm saying is write first, edit later, which I feel like is stricter advice in like nano season.
Right.
Of like, just finish your draft, blah, blah, blah. And I've always found that like if something's bugging me, I will focus so much better if I just let myself fix it. Especially like it's easier to fix it when you're like that close to it and you've recently written it versus like, okay, hopefully I can remember exactly what my train of thought was once revision time comes. And obviously there are times where you need to like stop yourself from just trying to get everything perfect again, but finding that balance of sometimes just go fix it. Like, and I'm sure there's a ton that has worked for me, but like there's no like one magic piece of writing advice. I'm like, oh, this is the one that I'm so glad I listened to. So I'm curious what you all have.
Yeah, I definitely can think more of the writing advice that I took as gospel and tried and found out did not work for me, because those are, I guess, more memorable. What about you, Megan?
I'll start with the one that did work for me. I don't even remember who told me to do this the first time, but putting your scenes on note cards. That is something that I've done for every single book, and I don't think I will ever have a reason not to do that. Like, it works so well for me every single time. It's truly the one part of my process that has not changed in 10 years. So that's definitely the thing that works the most for me. The advice that was the most detrimental that I thought I needed to participate in was writing every day. It mostly just made me feel like garbage, that I couldn't, like, oh, what, I don't like writing enough that I can't find a way to squeeze it in every single day. But no, it's just like, I just don't like working that way. I'd rather have one day where I write a lot and then a few days to kind of just recover from that. And so I wasted a lot of time when I was first starting writing, just like absolutely racking my brain trying to come up with stuff to write every day, when really I just needed more time to think.
What about you, Emma?
I think one thing that worked for me as kind of like some of like broader advice that's really common, but that helped me early on, is the idea of like write with the door closed and edit with the door open. And just like during that first draft, just like not thinking about like what's going to be marketable, or is this too similar to this, or is this the right name for this character? Just like not worrying about all that, like not worrying about the reception of a book that you like may never even finish, you know. And then like worry about those things later. And then least helpful advice is the exact same thing Megan said. Right, every day.
And Griswold also said it in the comments. I just
Also, in advance, I apologize if I cut out, because my internet is atrocious right now for some reason. But yeah, if you, like and Griswold, have something that didn't work for you that you hear all the time, let us know in the comments. We're very interested in the writing advice that did or didn't work for you. For me, it was kind of like overall career advice. Like, I had multiple people tell me that I should start out writing short stories in order to break into like writing a novel, like break into the publishing sphere, and that ended up being just like such a waste of time for me. And yeah, I feel like Megan and I both have said now, like, bad writing advice is detrimental because it wastes your time, because you waste time feeling guilty, you waste time doing something that you're not necessarily, what I did was wasted my time because I don't like short stories. I don't like reading them. I don't like writing them. So the idea that I was like trying to force myself into this box that I didn't even participate in, like I would never tell someone go write horror stories if they don't read or watch or enjoy horror at all. They're not going to be good at it. It doesn't make any sense. And also, practically, it didn't make sense as advice either, because you're not querying the same people you sent short stories to. So yeah, I'm sure it works for some people. I'm sure it was great practice for some people. I'm sure maybe people have got publishing deals that way. Someone loved their short story and then asked for a novel. I've heard that happening, but it's
I feel
certainly
like
not common.
That's probably only, even if like the only place I've even seen that is like prestige sci-fi.
Yeah.
fantasy.
Yeah.
I was gonna say the literary
type.
world.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the
but, like,
literary world.
Exactly.
like, the sci-fi and fantasy literary, like when you're in the like, there's every year there's a few books of top fantasy short stories of the year, and like those are the ones that, like the authors that hit there usually get tour deals. And
But I think it's true of like regular literary too. Like if you're like published in like a magazine or something, that usually helps a lot. I think because literary is just, I mean, all publishing is hard to break into, but literary is like really hard to break into.
Yeah.
I
think
I have some friends who have found short story writing nice as like something to break up the time spent writing a novel. They're like, oh, this feels like I'm making, but like for sure it's not something that's like your leg into traditionally publishing a novel anymore.
Yeah, I think like it was a case of definitely just like it was not at all the right advice for me as like someone who writes heavily genre non-literary fiction. It was like
like there YA, there's like how much market is there at all for short stories? Like
hardly
none.
Like anthologies, that's it, and you have to be an established writer for those.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's genuinely just like I always think now about who is giving me advice. Like, why are they giving me that advice? Because it worked for them, but why did it work for them? It's like, oh, because they're a literary writer. It's like we're not in the same, we're not even in the same book, never mind on the same page. So they're not going to know what's going on with my career. I'm not going to know what's going on with them. So
there's even a level of did it work for them? Like, is this what they're currently trying? But they haven't actually, like, it's the advice that they're following. And that's what they've been told they think the plan is.
True. Yeah, exactly. So
I remember that being a huge, like, stumbling block, I guess, in getting started on YouTube. Because back when we started YouTube, it was, write-ins weren't a thing. No one was just like getting together to be together. I think we started live streaming at a time when there were other people live streaming for sure, but there weren't a ton of people live streaming in groups at that point either. And so I constantly kept feeling like, well, I haven't succeeded. Why am I'm just like regurgitating this advice. And that was just, it's always hard to find good advice even now. But back then it was just like wall to wall people on the internet just spitting out all of the same 12 pieces of advice and trying to find like a fun new metaphor and like, oh, what if I make this one like an experiment?
I think it was a case of too, like advice used to be much more like, this is what works. This is what you need to do versus wording it in a way that's like, this is what worked for me and acknowledging that, your mileage may vary. It just seemed to be a lot more like everyone had agreed this is how you do it and you don't stray from that, right? Or
I'm wondering from
it's not going to work.
What Megan said about YouTube, if like some of this came from that time when we started, is kind of like the beginner of this influencer era, especially in like YouTube and writing, of like, so people kept like the value of watching people is that they could tell you what to do and what would work. So there was a pressure to like have tips and sound like you do what you're talking about and that these are the best tips. So even if it was something that you tried and had worked for you, there was a pressure to like sell them as like, this is how you write a book.
This is how you do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Watch
Oh,
me because I'm doing the Googling for you.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I read a bunch of
think
other
so.
authors' blogs.
Yeah, I read a bunch of blogs and I put them into one.
I've read Stephen King's On Writing.
Yeah.
Now we'll present it to you in my own words.
Let
Yeah,
me distill it in 4 minutes or less because all videos then had to be 4 minutes or less.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Oh my gosh. And now I like that the YouTube preference, at least for RightTube, if it's still called that, has kind of shifted to hanging out. Like I know a lot of people that put something on to sprint to it or to have it in the background. So it doesn't need to be, here is a list of 10 things you have to do to be published. It can just be hang out with me while I write, or hang out with me while I talk through this problem I've been having, or, you know, etc. I feel like I cut out there.
Just at the very end.
Yeah.
You're
If
mostly
I
okay.
disappear, that's why.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, I do think it's really fun now, like chatting about YouTube then, YouTube now, since we've been here a while.
So the research I did earlier was just asking ChatGPT to come up with like kind of within the last few years common writing advice. And the number one was show, don't tell, which I definitely think we heard so much of, and then like
I have so many shitty
decent
drafts because of
backtrack.
show don't tell.
Yeah, of like no, sometimes just tell us. Please don't show us everything. Like we all kind of did a collective course correction on, please just tell us some of the things.
I think that was something that people really got beat over the head with, because it is such a common newbie mistake to tell the audience what the character is thinking or feeling. But yeah, I don't know. It definitely is the type of thing where it doesn't apply across the board like people seem to think it should.
It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
And I think that's a struggle too with, you know, both people disseminating information about writing and people receiving it. Like a lot of people who are receiving this information for the first time are just trying to figure out, like, how do I make it work? How do I do it? Show, don't tell. You got it. I will not show us. I'll show you everything. I won't tell you a single thing ever again. You know, like you don't know to do anything more than take it at face value.
Yeah, it's not helpful advice either if you don't expand on it, or give examples, or talk about balancing. When do you show? When do you tell? It's definitely the type of thing that gets thrown out there as, you know, top 5 tips, and then definitely needs to be explained. What does that mean in detail? Or it's not helpful to the new writer that it should be helpful to. Because I think at a certain point, if you're like new or kind of in the middle, or you're you know, greatly improved, you've been doing this for years, like the new people are the target for that advice, because we know that we've been beat over the head with it, like I said. But yeah, it's the very, very beginners that say to me, like, oh, what does that mean? And then, yeah, they need you to explain what that means. Don't just tell them that, and you go forth and show everything, because yeah, that's what they'll do.
Yeah, and that's a huge issue too with, you know, the nature of giving writing advice online, is that you're constantly trying to bring in a new audience, and to bring in new people into writing, you typically are trying to reach people who are writing for the first time and looking for help. And I know that's something I have personally, to this day, I have a really hard time with. This, like, well, I still want to be reading about the craft of writing. I still want to be getting better, but it's much harder to find advice for someone who has been writing for a decade as compared to someone who's been writing for 2 months, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely find that too. You have to work a lot harder to find advice that isn't for, very, very beginners. Because if I hear show don't tell one more time, I'm going to scream.
I do think that Patreon is a great place that a lot of authors, or Substack, not Patreon. Substack is a great
Substack,
place that a lot of writers are publishing more in-depth information. I really, really love Susan Dennard's Substack. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm 95% sure Susan Dennard is the first person who I read on the internet saying to write your scenes on index cards.
It wouldn't surprise me if most of the good advice that we've got over the years has been from Susan Dennard.
Honestly, I owe her so much.
She's the only reason I know how to revise, I'm pretty sure.
Truly. If anyone has any good, like, oh, I love listening to this person talk about writing, definitely drop those recommendations in the discussion section or the comments if you're watching this after.
So my brain has immediately forgotten what his name is. He's the guy that he's a high fantasy writer. He's Mormon.
Brandon Sanderson.
Thank you. Thank you. Brandon Sanderson has a series of lectures on YouTube that I've watched about 3 times now, and have taken notes. So all you have to do is just type in Brandon Sanderson on YouTube and his lectures should pop up, or Brandon Sanderson lectures. There's so many of them and they're so long and they're super valuable because he talks about the publishing industry. Again, the publishing
I will
industry,
say though, like Brandon Sanderson's place in the publishing industry, even back when those videos came out, which was a long, long time ago, his experience is not going to be what your experience is. And like, he has good knowledge, but even if he had the most realistic down to earth view of publishing back then, the landscape is so different now.
Yeah, that's changed. It's always changing.
A lot.
Yeah. But his writing advice is solid. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I've watched those as well. It's been a long time now, but
Andrew Walker said,
the Writing Excuses podcast. I have never been a big podcast person, but it definitely seems like a solid place to get like a variety of perspectives on writing advice. Like so many of them, like week to week, interview different people, or like it's hard to be prescriptive in a podcast.
There's this one I've been wanting to watch. I don't know if I'm going to be able to, or listen to. I'm going to try and find the name of it. But it's like a traditional publishing podcast that is like kind of newer, I think.
Yeah, I'd be curious about that.
I'm going to try and find it. It's been on my to listen.
Publishing is the same in that it's very difficult to get advice that isn't on a query level, that goes beyond anything other than that.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's this one, Publishing Rodeo Podcast.
Oh. Let's sign up for that.
Yeah.
And Griswold says, Story Genius by Lisa Cron has to be one of my favorite books about the craft of writing. More things to add to my list. I'm thinking there's going to be more bad advice that we've gotten than good advice.
Oh, for sure.
I feel like not a ton of it is like fully bad advice. I'm trying to come up with examples of bad advice.
Just so much is subjective.
Yeah. Like there's one that like tortured a lot of people for a while. I don't remember who said, don't use the word said in your manuscript. But that was
I forgot about that.
I remember some bad advice.
I feel like any advice that's like really absolute, you know, anything that's like don't do this anymore, or you always, but especially the don'ts. I feel like a lot of the don'ts sometimes aren't helpful. Like maybe I like pay attention to what words you're using too frequently or things like that. But like when someone's like, just don't do this ever anymore, and it's like, what for you to say, you know?
Yeah. This list had avoid adverbs, and like they do like minimize.
Be careful.
Then, like you feel
Sprinkle
like, okay, I've got my one adverb. Where could I use it this chapter?
Right.
you finished your allotted adverbs for this chapter.
I feel like those are the kind of books of like don't say said, avoid adverbs, and show don't tell, where I just get so bogged down. Like I could see why it's quality writing, but like me having to deduce everybody's mood from reading everybody's facial expressions and like how exactly did they say this thing as they're describing like it bogs down so much storytelling.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
have
different kinds of writing.
I have no problem with someone saying like he muttered, you know, or he growled. Like as long as it's not back to back.
Yeah, I think mixing things up is a lot of times
Yeah.
what makes writing interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. I really like Stephen King's advice. His book on writing is one of my favorites, but I have a major problem with like how absolute he is about some of his advice. Like he basically said, if you plot, you're a hack. And I was like, okay.
Well,
We're
I
gonna
plot
have
and
a
I'm a
fight.
hack, so
We're going to have a
must be
fight over
true.
this. I will slap fight you, Mr. King. Like, let's talk about the endings of your books, shall we? Sorry, I get salty over that specific thing. Yeah, I can't think of anything other than, aside from did have one writer who told me that I shouldn't write YA because it was like fighting with gloves on, which I wanted to be like, sir, there's a whole sport. It's called boxing.
I think I had someone once try to tell me that like writing in first person, that they feel like books that are in first person are, and they weren't talking to me as like a writer, but like as a reader, you know, but they were like, I feel like books that are in first person are just kind of like a cop out. Like it's just really easy. And I was like, it's challenging in a different way.
Really easy? Excuse you. Watch your mouth. Like you go do it and then come back to me. Right?
Yeah, because I think there's like this perception, especially if you don't write, that like, oh, well, you only have to worry about one character or whatever. But it's like, but it's hard in a very different way because you only can show one character's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to
In
figure out
third
how to
person,
tell
I
the
can
entire
slip
story.
out just a little and be like, someone's doing something weird over here.
Yeah.
I think people tend to think it's just like a stream of consciousness and you can just write it like you're writing a diary, and it's like it'll be bad, but sure. I think the write every day advice also stresses me out. I try to, but like especially like on the weekends, I'm like, that's just not gonna happen, especially when you have a child, you know. Yeah, even
I mean, writing is also your day job. It's like,
yes, yeah,
I don't do my day job on the weekends. I'm not
Yeah.
getting paid to do that.
very much, yeah. Well, and even like advice, like the write with the door closed advice works well for Emma, but I think like that I do like the idea of that advice, but I think it's more of a metaphor, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
But like
It's more about the way you think about it.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Mhm.
I do remember him, some authors, maybe it wasn't even Stephen King, or maybe I just have a bug up my ass about Stephen King, but specifically there was some writer that was like, shut out the world, don't let anyone intrude on your space, like your writing time is sacred. And I was like,
Not a
sir,
literal
do you
door closed.
have children, sir? Like,
Sir, I'm in a community.
Yeah.
excuse you.
Yeah. This
Well,
is a
it's also
figurative door that you were closing in your
yeah,
mind.
like this better be a
Sir,
figurative door.
I like attention. So
But also, like, I have seen, and excuse me, but it's usually male writers who say things like that, where it's like, your wife is taking care of the house, your wife is taking care of the kids. So you have the ability to slam the door on the world and be like, don't bother me, I'm in my study for 8 hours. You know, like, for a lot of people, that's not possible. That's not good advice.
I wrote almost my entire last book, like just outside on campus during my lunch breaks at my last job.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah. If you make it into this precious thing where you can't do it in any space but this one specific sacred place, you're probably not going to get your novel finished, you know? Yeah. Yeah. I've seen a lot of advice where, and I get the idea why of doing stuff like writing rituals and stuff. And that's not even necessarily a bad idea because it programs your brain to be like, now is writing time. But hopefully your writing rituals are portable, because what happens if you do get really big? If your first book sells and you want to go on tour, you can't write book 2 that you're contracted for because you don't have your sacred space, like you got to write on the plane.
You can't light your special candle in the hotel room. Like,
the plane kicks you out because you lit a candle and you're boiling tea at your space.
you have to smoke a cigar after.
You got to
before
smoke a cigar and do your mantra. The airlines are like, ma'am, you're banned from Canada Airlines.
I do feel like so much of writing is figuring out like what works for you, what doesn't, what do you absolutely need in order to get the writing done, and what is just, oh, it's nice to be able to work in my office, but I don't personally need it. Someone else might, like they might really, really need to. And someone else, they might need to write a little bit every day. Whereas I feel like if I want to make big progress, I need to just like hyperfixate on it for a week or two and then come back to it later. So yeah, it takes a really long time, I think, to get to know what those non-negotiable things are for you and how you can make it work in the framework of the life you are hopefully living beyond writing.
Exactly. Yeah. Or even taking the advice, which may have working as a whole for some people, and like taking the part of it that works for you, like the writing every day thing. I'm finding in some ways that works well because I can, if I go for a while without writing, I will sort of get, like fall out of the story and be like, where was I? Now I'm confused. It's hard to get back into it. So I don't even necessarily write every day. I'll go back and I'll look at the manuscript. Like my rule is I don't have to write a single word if I don't have time or if I am exhausted and want to go to bed. But every night before I go to bed, I will open the Word doc at the very least and just look at it, because that actually helps my brain not to get thrown out of the whole thing. And I'll be able to return to that and not really struggle to get back into it. Because, I've learned that lesson that I do struggle to get back into it if I let it go for weeks, which sometimes I need to if I'm trying to work on 2 projects, right? So that is a piece of advice that works for me. I've just kind of tweaked it a little bit.
Yeah.
If you guys can think of another piece of advice that has really worked for you or that you have sort of adjusted.
I think the thing that I am running into the most right now, and I don't know if anyone else watching this will relate, is just that I find most writing advice frustrating now, because like most writing advice that is put out on the internet is directed at querying authors, but it talks about writing in such a way that it's like, oh, well, if you're querying, you must not know about A, B, C, D. Like, oh, you must not have tried 3-act structure, and maybe that's why you're not getting success on your fulls. And it's just it's part of why I've had to not be on Twitter so much, because as someone who queried for a while, got an agent, lost an agent, and has been querying for a while since then, it just feels so like infantilizing as a writer to be like, well, have you thought about like 3-act structure? Have you thought about writing every day?
Not telling?
Yeah.
Advice that is centered around success. Like,
yeah,
this is what got me success.
Yeah.
So maybe try that. Like that's not helpful. Now saying like, this is what helps me finish my drafts, or this is what helps me like write a book I'm proud of. Like, cool. But like, this is what helped me get an agent or get a book deal. Like, you really have to take that with a grain of salt, because there's so many other factors other than just how you wrote your book.
Yeah.
I think like as people when you are a person who wants to give advice, when you get somewhere that other people want to get to as well, it's you sit there and you go, you know what, I want to help people. It's a privileged position to be in. I want to make sure that I'm giving back in some way. But you also have to kind of self-examine and be like, are you in the position where you are able to give helpful advice? Like, I look at myself and I'm like, I've been out of the querying zone for 5 years. Publishing has changed drastically. And I only know that because I talk to people that are querying and I hear how hard it is. Now, if I were to not listen to them and go on Twitter and be like, try this is what I did, it's not going to apply, and it's going to just annoy people, right? Because they're like, you're so clearly out of touch with actually what's going on in the querying world. So like publishing advice in general. And I see that from other people that are like New York Times bestsellers, and they're like, this is what you have to do. And me, I'm like, I don't know if I'm ever gonna, get my, pay out my advance or whatever. I'm like, this isn't necessarily helpful for me to hear, like, here's how you deal with, only 3 people showing up in the front row of your signing. I'm like, damn, lady, I had 2 people.
Not 3.
I was excited they were there. That's all. Yeah.
I just thought of a piece of advice that like is not particularly helpful for me. I think it's good advice, but just not like helpful for me is don't revise as you write. Which like definitely I think there's like to a point like I would definitely say like don't just rewrite the chapter over and over and over again and never move forward. Like I think you have to be self-aware enough of like, is this just stopping me from moving forward because I'm trying to get it perfect? But for me, I found a lot of times I write like the first like 10% of the book, and then it helps me. It almost is a form of brainstorming. Like it helps me figure out the story a little bit more. And a lot of times I figure out like, actually, I want to do this thing. And so then I'll go back and I'll like rewrite that first 10% to get the book going in the direction I actually want it to go in. And there have been books in the past where I've like forced myself to be like, no, I'm just going to make note of it and keep going. And then it's like, you get to the end, you're like, well, I have to rewrite all of it because there was something that I need to be different in the first 10%, And so for me, I found it actually like helps my process, and I'm more likely to just get stuck further down the line if I don't make the revision when I need to. But I definitely like small things, like don't get caught up on that. But for me, if there's a big change I realize needs to happen, I might as well just do it now.
Yeah, I actually strongly agree with that, because when you were talking about that, I'm like, oh, that's also my process. Like I will literally write the first 3 chapters and then rewrite them multiple times sometimes and be like, no, I want the story to go in this direction. No, I want the story to go in that direction. And that's why the manuscript is often like radically different by the time I've conceptualized what it's actually going to be. Because it is a way of brainstorming, and usually the story is way better. It's frustrating because it takes a really long time, but that has also just become the way I write things. So yeah, I think that advice, it's not always great for, and it's very non-negotiable advice. When people give it, it tends to be like, never do this. It wastes time, and not so.
It's so funny because that does not work for me at all. Like if I pause, I'm not finishing. Like game over, find a new idea. So it really is like your mileage may vary.
Absolutely.
You like have to know yourself. You have to know what your like tendencies are, what your like barriers to finishing a book usually are, to figure out what advice is going to work for you.
And there's a level of like self-awareness of what worked for you one time may not be evergreen. And so
very true.
It's so hard to be like, no, this is how I write a book, when some other circumstance in your life has maybe changed, and that's just, it's not going to work anymore. But you've got to see it for yourself. Andrew's comment made me laugh though. Like, I'm sure that's probably true for some people here.
Sorry, guys.
I feel kind of awkward because most writing advice I learned from you guys. It's fine to hate advice we've given in the past. There are many videos in the past there are a lot of videos that I'm really, really proud of too that we've done. And like, I think especially once we started working with NaNoWriMo and we had kind of gotten through all of the advice that you could Google and had to really start thinking about the content we were creating. I'm very, very proud of some of those videos, but I'm also very aware that there was some shitty advice that I was just putting out there in the past.
I definitely think it's a case of, I wouldn't even necessarily say shitty advice, but I would definitely say
some prescriptive advice.
Exactly. Advice that we were maybe stating as fact that maybe shouldn't have been stated as fact, because maybe it won't work for you. Maybe people came away from that video and were like, oh my God, yes, this is what I needed to hear, and I'm doing great because of it. But I'm sure there were also people that were frustrated because they tried and it just didn't work for them, right? So yeah, we were as guilty as anyone else back then on YouTube, being like, "This is how you do it," because that's not always how you do it.
And we're probably like overcompensating now on that. This isn't going to work for everybody. So
Please.
I love Joe
I-
Catherine's comment. She said, my New Year's resolution was to work on character. I really liked the idea that the reader should be able to imagine the characters living even when they're off the page. And that's such a great way to think about it. I love that advice. Like when I read that and I started thinking about some of my favorite characters and how like definitely like all the characters from the Raven Boys, like I can just imagine them like hanging out and living their lives. And so, yeah, that's something I'm going to think about when I think about characters now.
Yeah.
This is a good. And Griswold said, some advice that didn't help me was the idea that writing is supposed to be hard, because at times when it wasn't, I thought that meant I was doing something wrong or my idea wasn't good enough. That's interesting, because I have said that before. It's supposed to be hard. I think that it's going to be hard, but it should also be enjoyable or satisfying. Like you should feel something other than this is hard. Does that make sense? Like, because I feel like I hate the editing process. Like when I'm drafting, I'm like, oh my God, this is so fun. But when I'm editing, I'm like, I hate every second of this. I like to complain. That's not necessarily fully true. It's not my favorite part. It's frustrating when I'm doing it because it feels overwhelming and hard. But as things are falling into place, that part feels satisfying. It's not all fun and it's not all horrible.
But we also have to keep in mind, not all writing is job writing. Like I'm sure there are fan fiction writers that it's never hard, it's never not fun, because it's something they do because it's fun.
There's also that the taste issue. I think it was Ira Glass that had a really good YouTube video on this, where it talks about the fact that like you read a lot, so you have a certain level of taste where you know this is good writing when you read something that's good writing, but you're still learning your craft. So your taste exceeds your level of talent, and it takes a while for that talent to get to match, you know? So you're going to be able to say, I know what I'm writing isn't up to snuff. I just don't know how to get it, to the level it needs to be. And it takes time. It takes a long time. I'm still at that place where I'm struggling a lot. That's what editing is for, but like that's a craft in itself. So it's always going to be a little bit frustrating, even if parts of it are fun. But I do think parts of it should be fun. It shouldn't be like, I hate this whole thing. Because I've had manuscripts where I'm like, I hate this whole thing. I want to set it on fire and run over its ashes. And oftentimes that means I need to just put the project aside and maybe come back to it later, see if is there anything worth resurrecting this for?
And to end Griswold's point of the times when it's not hard are usually the times when you don't need to revise it as much. When you've just kind of you're in that flow state, you've got it. That's what everyone wishes writing would be all the time.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I like to think everybody has sometimes, because that is what it makes you feel like you've got it all figured out, that you know what you're doing, which everyone needs to feel like sometimes.
Yeah. Those moments are far and few between, but sometimes.
I just think too, there's so much that you're working towards trying to get published, and obviously that goal hasn't changed for me personally. Obviously I still want to get published, but I used to have this huge fear that I know I vocalized on the channel multiple times, that I wouldn't reach my goals, and it would be because I hadn't worked hard enough to get there. I could have done something to make it happen faster, and I just didn't. And that was really hard to get over, but I do feel like I'm in a pretty good place with that now, to the point where I see this immense privilege in not being under contract. It's not that writing isn't ever work, because obviously I'm spending time on it, but if I'm not having fun, I'm not doing it. No one's paying me to not have fun writing. And know yourself, obviously this might not work for everyone, because I am still getting books done and making good progress, but it is just no one's paying me to have a bad time doing this, so I might as well just make sure I'm having a good time.
Yeah, that's kind of feels like rediscovering the joy in writing kind of thing, which is something I'm always going on about. But write the projects you love. write the projects you could see yourself writing a sequel to, you know. Because yeah, if you don't have a deadline, if you're not under contract for something, make sure you enjoy it. Make sure you're writing it for a reason, you know.
And honestly, like I try to walk up the line of realism and optimism, and I know I'm not always perfect at it, but like truly, whether I finished my book in January or I finish it in May, if it gets a book deal, it likely wouldn't be significantly sooner, you know? So like I might as well take more time and have fun. Because publishing is moving so slowly right now.
Yeah. Like so slowly.
So slowly.
Like literally my editor pushed my deadline to the end of March and she was like, we'll check back in then and see what happens. Who knows when we'll publish it? And I was like, okay.
I still have queries out with agents who are explicitly not CNR, so closed, no response agents. Like they specifically have said they reply to queries. I have queries out that are 2 years old.
It's so incredibly backed up right now.
I have one query out in Query Manager that was sent in 2020. It was the book I queried before the last book I queried.
That's crazy. Yeah, the vibes I get, like my editor's professional. She would never be like, I'm swamped. Oh my God. But the vibes that they're putting out right now are just like, it's chaos. It's so backed up. Like I had a deadline of like the middle of the month and they were like, let's push it out. And I was like, I think I know why we're doing this. And it's fine. I'm like, yes, give me more time. I'm all about more time. But yeah, it's very, 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 very backed up is what I'm maybe possibly years backed up. I don't know.
And people are still getting book deals. I don't want to like say that and have people think like, oh, I don't have any hope that I'm ever going to get published. Although I have wondered that in dark times. I feel like right now I'm still pretty hopeful about book deals and stuff. But yeah, that was a whole tangent, but.
Well, but we didn't really specify if it was going to be writing advice or publishing advice. And I feel like that commonly goes hand in hand.
Most people don't go on the internet looking for writing advice if they aren't planning to publish it in some form or other. I could be wrong. Let me know if I'm wrong.
Joe Catherine says self-publishing needs some prune
honestly
juice.
Maybe an enema. I don't know.
Oh Lord. Oh dear. Yeah, pretty much. They are a dinosaur is what we keep saying. So very old. Yeah, we're coming to an hour. Do we have, why don't we go and go around and say if there is a piece of advice that you would give now?
What's the question?
What's the question?
Yeah.
Just
like what's the advice that you would give to a new writer now?
I have
like how to write a book.
I have an advice about advice.
Writing in general. Or advice, sure.
Yeah, I have advice about advice, especially for new writers. It's just like anytime someone's giving you writing advice, like pay attention to, I mean, one, like what the qualifications are, but that isn't always like, there are people who are great writers and write great books who may not be published or whatever. But particularly like, are they trying to sell you something? And this is something I like teach as like a librarian with like critical thinking even, you know, it's just like always pay attention to whether someone's trying to sell you something, whether it's like they're writing a book or they're writing class, or like some piece of software or something like, and that's not to say that all advice you have to pay for is bad. Like people should be compensated for their time. But just like be conscious of that if they're trying to sell you like a course for a few $100s.
That's a very good point.
Just pay attention to that, so.
Yeah, that is an excellent piece of advice, particularly with the rise of YouTubers that are trying to sell courses and trying to sell advice, I guess, is where's that coming from?
Yeah, and even things like vanity publishers and people who want to charge you a bunch of money for agenting, like anything like that. If like money is involved when it comes to anything that will help you get published or help you write your book, like just pay attention to like who the person is, where they're coming from, why they
What
want
are
your
their
money.
qualifications?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. If somebody's going to try to charge me $500 for a 3-week course, I want to know what their qualifications are. I feel like that's sensible.
Yeah.
The advice-
And also, you just don't need to spend money to learn how to write a novel well. So if someone's asking for your money, make sure it's someone you really, really, really trust and like you have a good reason for doing it.
Mhm.
I think if I were going to give the one piece of advice that I think is like always good is read a lot. Like I think that's solid advice. You can't really go wrong with that. That's how you learn to write, in my opinion.
And in the genre you want to be
I read
writing.
too much.
It ruined your mind. Now you can't write. You read too much. What have you done? Yeah, it's a very basic piece of advice, and I don't think you can go too wrong with that. And it's just.
And it is
solid.
one that I see people fighting against sometimes, like especially in YA, of like, oh, I don't need to read this to understand how to do this.
Wrong.
Mhm.
False. Yeah, and I also see people saying stuff like, I don't read because I don't want to be influenced by it when I'm writing for my ideas and stuff. And I'm just like, that's terrible.
Or even just I don't have time to read.
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
the time it's going to take you to learn everything you need to know about writing without reading is going to be so much more than if you picked up books.
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes.
So I think the like I don't want to be influenced with my ideas thing is so funny because what's actually going to happen if you don't read anything is you're going to come up with an idea that you think is super
Most
unique and like
basic
there's already a
stuff.
book like that. Yeah.
Yep.
I love this one that Andrew Walker put in the chat. Give your characters 2 wants and make them choose. That is top tier advice. I love
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I really like that.
And Joe Catherine said, I like the advice that to write good, you have to be willing to write badly first.
Yes.
I wish that wasn't true.
I also find the advice that to not worry about your first draft sucking.
Mhm.
I really appreciate that advice.
Yeah. I think it was Shannon Hale once who said like you can't build a sandcastle if you don't have any sand in your sandbox. You know, like you have to have something there in order to work, in order to edit it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Learn
Chris
how to
wants
finish. I was just gonna say learn how to finish a project. That's another good one.
Yeah, arguably the most important thing. Just figure out, do whatever you have to do to get to the end of a project.
Yeah.
Ed Griswold said, try a lot of methods to find what fits for you right in the morning. Try the Pomodoro technique right before bed or after dinner. Eventually, you'll find a good rhythm.
Did
Agreed.
Andrew Walker says his advice is from Kelly?
Yeah.
We're all
Oh,
like, that's so good. It's
Like,
such
I think
good
so.
advice.
I'm sure I got it from someone else. Like
I
it's,
forgot that.
I at one point had it on a note card with Kelly's name on it. Like,
Kelly, you're
on
so
my desk.
wise. Oh man.
I just think my only advice is just to have fun. Writing should be fun. You're making
Solid
worlds.
advice.
You're making life. If it's not fun, wait until it's fun again. Because either it will or it won't, and you don't want to be doing something that's never fun for you. So unless
That's
you're under
really true.
contract, then that's success is your burden. But
if you have a 12-book deal from Macmillan, you got to
Oh
finish.
Lord.
oh my god,
The burden.
oh,
That's a whole nother chat.
that is. Oh, I'm so happy and not at all jealous to have your career
She
just
lied.
set.
It's me. I'm the
Um,
person with the 12-book deal. With
It
Macmillan.
is, yeah.
Surprise! What a way to make an announcement, Emma.
Can you imagine?
Surprise.
That's just your debut is just 12 books.
Yeah.
They were so impressed.
Oh, I would murder you.
steal your face and write that.
Wear it like a mask. It's me, I'm Emma. Anyways, on that note, Kelly, does the sane person in our chat have any final words of advice?
Since you apparently have great wisdom.
Since you have great wisdom.
You
to
do.
share.
Much wisdom.
Okay, this is way too much pressure to come up with any
Sorry.
wisdom.
No. Speak, wise one.
Hey,
What
once
does-
upon a time, I was full of great wisdom. I haven't really written anything in like 3 years. I'm just here making a blanket, doing my thing.
All right, what does the chat GTB Oracle say?
Actually, the one we haven't touched on that isn't even writing advice, but is definitely the thing that keeps me with writing is finding your writing community. Because I'm here because you guys are here. And like not just you three, but like everyone in the comments. And like that is what's going to bring me back to writing. Of getting to see everyone else's joy around it, getting to share what works and what doesn't, just holding each other accountable.
And
That is
also,
the
like,
core of it.
I'm really like impressed and proud of your like choice to step back when you felt like you needed to
Yeah.
step back from writing, and not feeling like, no, I've got to keep writing because it's my identity and it's my group of friends and stuff. Like you were able to just say it's not.
I mean, there was definitely some pressure of like Erin keeps saying she isn't friends with people who aren't writers. She's made that very clear.
Not you. I didn't mean you. Also, I felt like that identity thing was a dig at me. Rude. No, when you're my actual friend, I'm not going anywhere.
She's just not making new friends who are.
I'm just not making new friends. The
And
application
Erin's
is
aware
super
that like,
close.
this friendship is no longer optional. There's no like opting out at this point. So
You will show up at
Kelly,
my house.
your address.
You know where I live. Well, I think the finding your writing community was a great note to end on.
Yeah.
Because it is a very, very good piece of advice is finding your support system and finding the joy in your writing through that support system / community / writer friends. All right. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you for sharing the advice that you were given that worked for you and what didn't. And we will see you next Sunday. Do we know what we're chatting about?
Nerd-in.
The Nerd-in.
It's a nerd.
Excellent. All right. Well, we will see you next Sunday for a Nerd-in. Bye.